Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, recently in an episode, we spoke about the importance of compensation and benefits and how companies are designing them for a multi generation workforce. And the compensation and benefits are very crucial to get talent inside the company. But how do you then go about retaining them and keeping them, growing them? And that's where the whole concept of engagement, talent engagement comes in. But how has talent engagement shifted over the years, considering so much is changing with technology, with the competition, with career spans, and multi generations at the workforce? But surveys and literature actually says that when you think about engagement is much more beyond just the perks. It's not also about just being happy at the workplace. It's about how do you go and actually think about contributing beyond what is expected, and the result of that is actually much more positive when you think about innovation happening, employees staying longer, and so on. But how do companies go about getting this engagement? And when you talk about Gen Z, here's the generation which has seen a very different context, and that expectation, perhaps from an employer, are also very, very different. But to help us decode some of that is just the expert, and I'm very happy that we finally made this happen. I'm delighted to welcome Hannah Kushner. Hannah, good morning and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
Okay, Hannah, this is a topic which is not only very, very relevant for all generations, for the HR fraternity, but even as a business manager. I have lots of questions. I am as over the years, we've seen managing teams but it seems like the whole equation of the workplace and the worker is changing. So we'll dive in, but let's first hear a little bit about you. Can you share and give us a little background of your work, your story, and all the things that you've done over your very illustrious career?
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. Basically, I help executives, managers, and entrepreneurs see business issues that are hiding in plain view. And we all have our expertise. You can't know everything, nobody can. So I help highlight some of those things. And my work more recently has been focused on employee engagement because it is so important. Um, and particularly when you peel it back, this whole concept of fairness. People talk about honesty, but you can't have honesty with fairness. So, to me, that's like oxygen in the room. And I recently wrote a book about that called "Seeking Fairness at Work." Um, and basically, I'm spending most of my time as far as with the book, with public speaking and writing. So that is how to
Fantastic.
help managers.
Lovely. We'll get to the book a little later in a moment, Hannah, but let's dive in. You've spent considerable time over your career, and of course, penned some of this in the book as well. Let's talk about employee engagement. It's kind of the burning question.
Sure.
You can do all the things, you can give the perks and the benefits. You've got the salary, you've got the location, you've got all the things, you got free food. You can do all the things to entice an employee, but ultimately when they make it indoor, right, it's about what happens then. So let's start with kind of the big picture story of kind of just simply decoding when we talk about engagement. Sometimes is it correct to say that people confuse the perks with the term engagement? Help us to understand, what do we mean by engagement?
Well, engagement is that extra discretionary level of effort that people bring to the workforce. Their enthusiasm that turns into more productivity and innovation. And, you raise an interesting point about the perks and the salary and the location and trying to make people happy. And in my experience and my research, it shows that people are looking at it as a transaction. And what they should really be looking at is a social contract. Because to me, those perks remind me of the absentee parent. They're not around much, but when they are, they shower you with presents and they take you places and things like that, but they're not physically or emotionally available. And I'm not talking about having a romantic relationship, not at all, but being able to have that conversation, to be able to connect, to be able to learn, and not just be told, here's a task, do it. I want the results, end of discussion. It's about working with someone, not for someone. That is a really critical difference.
Yeah, so it. To help us now just to take that a step further to say that, and you know, how do, if I'm a potential employer, right, the
Yeah.
first pitch I make among many things is how big and how grand I am and the culture and the career path. And if I'm an employee, I'm perhaps in most surveys looking at like my sort of extrinsic factors of kind of choosing an employer. So how do I go about kind of thinking about engagement from an employee's perspective? Is that something one experiences only when they get in?
Not necessarily. I think people experience engagement in a number of different ways. In selecting a company that they want to apply for, I mean, there's the position. But going back to, the employer's perspective for a moment, yes, they want to talk about how great their company is and the products and the customers and the services they provide. But when it comes to hiring, one mistake that I see many employers make is not being specific enough about identifying the skills, the mindset and skill set that will let someone be successful in their organization. So that is really, really key right from the beginning. Because as in any contract, it's about managing expectations. What is somebody bringing to the table on either side of the desk? And that sometimes gets lost because everybody it's like on a first date. I want you to like me. I wanna go on a second date. But who knows where this relationship will go? And especially if you're looking for a job, you need you need income. Um, and, the benefit of, Gen Z being at the entry level, there's more entry level jobs than there are more senior positions because the pyramid gets smaller at the top. So they do have more opportunities. But to find an opportunity that's a good fit, the organization has to be very honest with themselves about the skills and mindset that they're looking for to interview properly for that so that they're getting the right people in. There was one situation somebody said, "Oh, I don't want to tell people that there's a lot of repetitive work because that might be boring for them." But there are some people who love repetitive work, you know? It may not be your cup of tea, but it is for somebody else who's like, "I love that certainty. I know I can do it." As opposed to somebody who's like, "Oh, no, I'm a big picture person. I like the ideas." And the person who likes repetition is like, "Oh, no, they're terrified of it." So being very specific and understanding what will allow someone to be successful in your organization. Because if that's a good fit, they will find the success. They will want to stay longer. 'Cause it's working for them.
So, Hannah,
That's number 1.
okay, sorry, please go ahead.
No, but continue, please. Yeah, there's more questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so. Where then is the spectrum of engagement from an employer's perspective? Do I start my journey right, perhaps as the very first touch point? And like when you think about Gen Z, like how easy I make the onboarding process, how easy I think about the application process. And certainly we'll talk in a moment in some detail about engagement while you and once you're in. But help us with the spectrum. It seems like if I'm just coming out of the college, right, and then of course I see myself in a potential company for whatever number of years, right? And so, what is that spectrum? And let's just try and talk about the very first sort of few yards of the engagement journey.
Well, how the company is presenting itself, okay? It's a marketing opportunity for the company. They're marketing themselves to a potential employee. And so being able to speak their language, to be able to identify honestly what they're offering. If they talk about flexibility, then there does need to be some flexibility. If they talk about transparency and honesty, well, then there needs to be transparency and honesty. Not that somebody gets into the job and like, "Oh, I was sold a bill of goods here, but the reality is different." There's all these unwritten rules, and I had no idea this was gonna happen. So of course they're not happy. The social contract has been broken. And were made implicit promises that then weren't kept. So I think the organization needs to look at the entire cycle, as you pointed out, from the information that they put out that's on their website, that is in recruiting information, the interview process. Who are you sending to interview? Is it somebody who is a good people person that can connect, or somebody that's very stiff and firm and, the command and control type? Well, how are they going to connect? And then even afterwards, from the minute an offer is made, and so that's really when more engagement starts. What steps are being taken to let people know part of this team now? Okay. Are they sending them information? If they have company swag, are they sending them a ball cap or a t-shirt or something that says, you're part of us? Okay. Can't wait to have you join us. Welcome. And then when they arrive, is their desk ready? Do they have the tools necessary that they need to be successful? Or, oh well, IT is working on it. We'll get you your password maybe tomorrow. That kind of thing. It's like going to a hotel and your room's not ready. How does that make you feel? So it's all those little touch points. Like, how would you feel if you were in their shoes? And I know it's difficult for companies when it's like, you have a job, it needs to get filled, and you're busy with this over here, as opposed to focusing on the welcoming and the transition and the onboarding and helping people with the steps necessary to be successful. There's assumptions that are made that they're going to jump in and hit the ground running. And especially with people that are new hires and new to the workforce, there are assumptions that are made that just, how are they supposed to know? How are they supposed to know? And filling that gap, I think, is one thing that will help bring people into the fold and, make them feel that what they do matters, that they matter. We want you here. We're glad you're here.
Yeah. Now, I think you make some very good points. I mean, small points like who is there at the interview, right? Is he
Yeah.
is he a people-friendly person? I think that can make such a big difference, especially, I mean, why just Gen Z for any of us? And it just, as you mentioned, like the initial experiences kind of builds on how one can foresee the upcoming journey. So let's continue to trail along now. We've got presumably a good onboarding experience. We've got yeah, as you say, the flexibility boxes tick off, and the culture and all of that. And nowadays, of course, the Gen Z and all of us can go to websites where we can see the comments of how the company is seen, and ex-employees, and so on. So I think there's one sort of touch point or data point of kind of validating some of that. But on to the sort of the, you're there in the company, you've got high aspirations, you're quite motivated, and there you are. Um, Help us to now think about engagement in sort of a day-to-day process, right? I'm there. What must happen, because oftentimes I think you see that so many companies invest in engagement surveys, and they don't often kind of always tell us the story, or maybe the engagement story tells one picture, but the employees could be very stressed as well. And therefore, if you're in the now sort of in the thick of it, right, how do we see engagement playing out?
Well, you mentioned employee engagement surveys. Um, a lot of companies use them. There's different types, but as any survey, it can suffer if the survey questions are not phrased properly, because employees may be afraid to answer that in a yes no way, or afraid to, you know, posit something. Um, whereas asking a question of, what would make your life easier? Could surface an issue or a concern that, "Are you happy?" doesn't, because they're supposed to be happy. And so the actual drafting of the surveys, regardless of what they're called, their frequency, is certainly very important in terms of getting the proper information back. But even more important than getting the information is what's done with it afterwards. Okay. Is there a follow up? Are employees told, hey, we're doing great here? The company knows it needs to do some work over here. Here's what we're going to do. We'd also like some ideas from you. Are they part of the problem solving process, or is it everything? Does it all roll downhill? So I think that makes a difference. And the worst thing that happens is when a manager gets feedback and it's like, okay, who said that? I want to know whose answer that is. And then yeah, you're laughing, but it's true. And then you know what happens. There's some form of retaliation or pushback or bias or something that the employee experiences. And even if that employee deals with it, others see it. So the next time there's a survey, how honest are the answers going to be? right? People start to push back. They're like turtles in a shell. They pull back, right? They're protective because it is their income unless another job comes along. Um, and so, I think that's just human nature. So surveys are good. What's more important is the ongoing feedback. Employees are told that I should say managers, that you shouldn't just wait for an annual review. You should be constantly providing some kind of feedback so people can course correct instead of going way off to the side. And then the end of the year is like, oh no, Pearl Harbor file, boom, and now there's consequences. All of these are learning opportunities, but it takes a manager who understands that and who is equipped to make those course corrections in a way that's helpful. I mean, we've all had teachers or coaches in the course of our lifetime, and there are those that are really harsh, and there are those that you just love working with because you know that they're there to help you get better. You're good, but you got potential, and they help bring it out. And I think that's the leadership challenge. A lot of discussion is Gen Z doesn't do this. And, I applaud their ambition, and I think that they're a great generation, but our leaders are still too often focused on command and control that they grew up with and think that, well, I went through it, now they have to, that's just the way it is. And that kind of harsh response isn't going to bring out the best in people. So I think there's an opportunity for leaders to up their game so that they can help their employees up theirs.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. I think we can. I mean, you want to have surveys, but how do you move the surveys in the system, and how do you deal with the surveys is so very essential. And as you say, that it comes down to your own people leadership, and you as a leader, people leader, just kind of looking at some of that, and pivoting based on what you see, rather than sort of saying that I got you, okay, here's the guy who, or here's the person who's not very happy, but he shouldn't be like that. So Hannah, let's talk now, let's go, let dive in. I'm curious to know, can you think of, and can you give examples of companies who are doing some good engagement strategies, and ways in which we can engage Gen Zs, and what's been working? What have you seen?
Well, one suggestion that I'd like to share with you is what I call more just-in-time learning. Gen Zs, they understand the need for continuous learning. They want to learn, they're dying to learn. And so, rather than having these formal type courses, it's more in terms of small bites, but also things that are relevant that can be put and applied immediately, as opposed to, well, you might get down the road, you might need something like this, and then people forget. So that kind of just-in-time learning is really very powerful because people get it, they absorb it, and they can use it right away, which helps the company advance. But of course, that does require some planning on management's part as to what those tidbits are. And we talked about the onboarding process. But it's not just your first week, but that over a period of time, like the end of the week. So how did you have any questions? Even on the first day, who do you go to when you have questions? Right? But that follow-up to say, "Well, we're checking in to make sure that, things are going smoothly." After a week, after a month, after 3 months, after 6 months, and each of those intervals provide an opportunity to say, "Well, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?" And those could also be teaching opportunities for the organization to learn about how they can improve their onboarding process. To also identify, well, maybe that manager could use a little training. We assume that leadership is perfect and almighty. Well, they have a lot of power. I don't doubt that. But there's room for improvement, and continuous because so much of it is uh, using our own awareness, how we're coming across, how people misinterpret what we're saying. I mean, communication is a huge, huge part of this, in terms of managing Gen Z's expectations about what we can do and what we can't do. And it's one thing to say, I want to learn, I want flexibility, I want financial stability. Well, that's nice. Not school anymore, where you go to class, take your exam, and you get promoted. And that happens after how many semesters and on, on. The real world isn't linear like that. I mean, I look at my own career. I zigged and zagged, and sometimes it was a lateral move, sometimes it was moved up, and so understanding those expectations and helping to manage them about what's realistic, and that it isn't always as easy as checking off a box. Well, now I've owed a promotion. Well, that's nice, but where are you going to go? Organization doesn't have an opening. Does that mean you go someplace else? Well, maybe it does. But, you've had a great relationship working with Hannah. Don't think you're going to find Hannah over there, right? You might, you might not. You might find a real command and control person who'll pay you a lot of money, but forward in other ways. So assuming that everything is static and that you can just always keep adding and improving, that's not always the case. There's trade-offs. So helping manage expectations and communication strategies. I shouldn't even say strategies. It's about that relationship. It's that social contract. It's about recognizing you're having a bad day. Okay, I understand. Let's take a break. Let's focus on a different deadline. Let's see what other resources we can help bring to bear. It's having that human connection of building goodwill as opposed to transactional. I gave you more benefits. There's more goodies in the break room. Now you owe me this. I mean, that's just hard. It doesn't need to be. We're people. We're human.
No, absolutely. I think you make a good point. It's not a one-time thing. You've got, hey, we gave you the best salary, we gave you all these other things on the list, and off you go. I think it's the ongoing sort of journey and just having a pulse of how that's going. I suppose, is that something you put the onus on the direct manager or also the HR? And you think about that, or is it a combination? Because some of the companies who are doing a good job, is it some combination? Is it the peer culture as well, who is also kind of looking out for you, working with you? What have you seen?
I think it's a combination. I think HR can help support management, but going back to the surveys, it's not HR's job to fix what's there because those surveys are really reflecting feedback about leadership. That's not HR. That's the supervisors. That's the management chain because what they do and what they tolerate is really what shapes the culture. That is really what the culture is. And so it comes down to communications. It's about continuous learning for everyone about how to keep improving the relationship. Um, empathy, the honesty. I'm not saying that senior management can tell everyone everything, especially if they're going to leave in 2 years and then go to a competitor and maybe tell them. I mean, there are certain things that can only be shared within certain groups, but bringing somebody in, working with somebody to say, okay, okay, here's how we're going to do it. What do you think of this? Encouraging feedback, encouraging the ideas instead of having it all flow downhill, I think can go a long way because when people understand why, then suddenly they realize the important role that they play, even if it's not the biggest role, but it's a role. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there and why they matter, why it's wrong. It's like that old parable that yeah. Man is walking in the woods and he comes across a prisoner, and the man is so dejected and he's breaking rocks until he's like, "Oh, this is terrible. I'm just, gonna do this for the rest of my life." So of course he moves on. And then he comes across another man, again, a prisoner. He's breaking rocks, he's happy. Boom, boom, boom. He's like, "What why are you so happy?" He goes, "I've broken rocks." He says, "Yeah, I know, but, there's someone else who thinks this is terrible." He goes, "Yes, I'm gonna use these rocks. I'm gonna build a beautiful home, palace." He has a purpose. He sees why it's relevant. I mean, the task by itself may seem small, but it's huge in terms of the overall importance of the so everybody, from the mailroom to the CEO. I don't care who you are. And taking for granted people who have a smaller role is really incredibly unfair to that person, the culture, and to the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good example. I think giving the employee the purpose or the vision to see that, hey, you're part of a bigger story, and your contribution matters, and I think that's where you see how employees can kind of take ownership, and we've seen similar stories. But so Hannah, let's talk about I think we see the point and the value of this, but in large organizations, and I work with clients, and as I'm sure you have, where you have diverse teams and you have global teams and who are there in multiple time zones, right? How do I go about making sure that engagement happens? Because the boss is just like sleeping when the other employee on this team member is kind of waking up, and inevitably does it that are there stories or examples, or like when you've seen that when you're managing a large span of control and also fairly diverse set of teams spread across, um, are there things that managers do which keep the employees engaged?
Well, you raise a really good point. It's very challenging when people are in diverse time zones and one is sleeping and one is awake and that type of thing. I keep coming back to the social contract and the importance of the personal relationship. Uh, Zoom and some of the technologies that we have are terrific. They really are. They certainly let us do more with less. But I'm a firm believer, and I've seen this time and time again, it's no real substitute for personal face-to-face meetings. And so when somebody has a huge team that spans the globe, I would encourage them to get on a plane periodically and have a meeting so that they get to know somebody a little bit better than just a screen. Because even managing a Zoom meeting, it takes a lot to do it well and keep people engaged. Because especially if it's a large meeting, how many people have their video off or are doing something on the side or being distracted with their phone or whatever? Um, when you're in person, it's a different ballgame. And it also shows you care. And that is huge. It's saying, I want to get to know you. Tell me more about what's happening day to day. Because, even if you have that huge span of control, there are things that can't be communicated in a Zoom call. And they could be those little things that start to make the engagement unravel. How can I make your job easier? When was the last time somebody asked you that? Right? It's usually, "What can you do for me?" as opposed to, "What can I do for you?" And I don't again, going back to perks, I don't care about the jelly beans in the break room if I've got tech issue or something, um, or a time zone issue. Somebody's always scheduling a meeting just when I'm, trying to have dinner with my family. Can we mix that up? I mean, just having a little give and take, a little flexibility. It's not necessarily the big things, it's the little things that start to grate, like sandpaper, that eventually there's one little thing too much and it's like, no, I'm out. I'm done.
Yeah. But do you sense, and just to build on that, I mean, we often see in stories, Anna, where you're in a startup and you've got a bunch of people who are there, and they're quite self-motivated and driven to work beyond the 9 to 5, and there's a sense of ownership, and sometimes in very large organizations you see a very well-structured system, but somewhere that can get lost. Do you sense that a size matters? I mean, does that come in the way?
Wow. I think very large organizations get very comfortable with themselves. And what they really should be doing is reinventing themselves. I mean, we have so many stories of large companies that don't exist anymore. They were huge, they were successful, or they're a mere shadow of their former self because they didn't read the market right. Um, that there's pluses and minuses between the large organization and the startup. The startup isn't going to guarantee anything. It is a risk. It's rolling dice, and it could turn into the next Facebook and Meta, or it might not. And so, if people are willing to accept that, fine. Um, there's no guarantees. The financial security is up in the air. You just don't know. And so for people that are looking for flexibility and they want to go up a ladder, et cetera, that that may or may not be the right choice for them because it could work out, it might not. And that's what I mean about going back to when you're in school, it's very structured. You go to class, you take your exams, you get promoted, and so forth. There's a clear line as to the check boxes of what you need to do in order to succeed. But it's a different ballgame in the working world, uh, in terms of what somebody values as success compared to what you value for success, and finding the right fit. And it's one thing for Gen Z with a lot of entry level positions, but I think every generation goes through this. Very idealistic, love the enthusiasm, admire the ambition, don't lose that fire. But as we get older, first of all, the jobs in terms of moving up in terms of executive position and management positions, the pyramid is smaller, so there are less of them. It makes it harder to jump, um, because you have a certain income. You may also have a family that you need to support and house payment and car payments, and your financial situation is a little bit um, heavier than when when you were younger. I mean, that just comes with part of life. And so, the stability of the job you have as opposed to the job you might have, and even though some of them may have big salary bumps, how many times can there be a big bump like that? What skills are you bringing that merit that kind of salary bump? So I think expectations need to be tempered at a certain point. Don't lose the fire, you know, but understand that we don't always get everything that we want. And organizations can't be everybody's sugar daddy. It doesn't work that way. But they have to be honest in terms of what they can do, what they can't do, but more important, why.
Yeah. No, I think
The
that's
why
yeah.
gets lost sometimes.
It's such a good point. I think just to manage the expectations because you cannot promise the moon every time, and as you say, there does come a time in one's career where the opportunities become fewer or it just plateaus out, and you have to think about going laterally or in a new role or even sometimes outside. And I think I just want to underscore that because I think very too often the incoming generation and I mean, there's just that expectation that there's going to be a linear growth, right? I'm just going to climb and then next promotion and then this and then that. So I think that's a very good point. What are some of the warning signals here, Anna? Like, let's say I'm a employee, and now specifically from the Gen Z kind of lens, considering that there's all this say that hey, too much technology, they're anywhere short of having a short attention span. What are some of the warning signals from a manager's perspective to kind of look up for to say that look, they seem to be disengaged?
I would have people look out for um, how people are communicating because when somebody first starts a job, they are never more engaged than on day one. So, how does that compare to day 180? Are they communicating less? Are they volunteering less in terms of ideas? Are they waiting for you to say the first word? Or, when you ask, how are you? How are things going? Do they give you just short one-word answers? I'm fine. It's okay. Um, are they trying to avoid a real issue? Um, and if there have been issues in the past and they haven't been handled well, because conflict management is one of those hidden cultural norms, because organizations, they talk a good game, they got the mission statement and all of that. But a lot of managers are not trained on conflict resolution. And so they want to avoid it. And I understand why, because you don't know, somebody might have an emotional breakdown. They might cry, they might yell, they might scream, they might pound the desk. But on the other hand, if they just hold it in, one day that kettle is going to explode and it's going to go boom. Um, in some workplaces, that turns into workplace violence. There are shootings. It's not pretty. But being able to manage conflict, to recognize it, to address it properly, and again, when there's a resolution, explain why. because otherwise it can, how many times does somebody encounter a double standard? Well, they left early. How come I can't leave early? They got the plum assignments. When is it my turn? Explaining those differences can go a long way to saying, your turn will come. By the way, it would be really helpful if we had you focus on this little bit of training here, because then you could take on more of these projects, right? I mean, being able to identify, and I think that's one thing where leaders can continuously learn. Where can they mentor? Where can they coach? Uh, Not every manager or supervisor is a good teacher.
Yeah. No, such a good point. Yeah, and I just like the simple sort of checkpoint of day one versus day 180 versus another day, and just checking the energy, checking the way in which I show up, the way in which I'm now contributing to the team conversations, and I think you just it done it from what you're saying, that you really just hope, and the manager here becomes, and he or she is just that such a how shall we say, a very curious and a good people person to see some of these signals, right? Else we miss it, and we just kind of go from project to project. Hannah, which of the companies that have you seen, like, or can you think of any firms that the Gen Z admire when you think about engagement, or even just from your practice, like where you sense that, what, these companies are doing some really cool stuff. If you have some examples or stories or some names.
Oh, well, I don't like to give names. Um, I'm not sure.
Perhaps you could just
You know, I,
share, like,
I
okay, the kind of things that you've seen. Like, we've talked about that, of course, a few minutes back, but much beyond just the learning. Like, so let's just say that, okay, these are the four things that, like, some of the best companies or the best managers have done.
Well, I think you have to look at the big picture of, the organization, and an organization that doesn't just do the training, but that hits all of the high notes, because what good is the training if the conflict management is terrible, or the accountability isn't there, or the communication skills aren't there. So I think the best organizations, they identify what they're good at, what they need to get better at, they address it, and they address it with their employees so that they are part of the solution, because we support what we help create. And I think that is the biggest thing, to keep that pipeline of communication open in order to have the transparency, and also to be honest, to say, okay, well, maybe we messed up here. And that is really hard for an organization to admit, or for an manager to admit. And I don't think there's any shame in that, really. We're all human. We're not perfect, but together we can be better. And so the more ideas and the stronger it is, the better it is, and the better it is for the organization and the culture, because it also helps encourage teamwork. And it helps build that chemistry where the innovation comes, where you do get more productivity, and that is really the heart of company growth.
So, Hannah, just as a way to wrap up, I mean, this has been very helpful. We've looked at engagement strategies and sort of at a micro level, what are the signals if it goes wrong? Um, as we just think about, you know, sort of closing this, what could be a do and a don't for a manager to ensure, like, he or she's on top of it when it comes to just generally making sure that his team or her team is super engaged? That's one part of it. And the second, of course, we flip it to the Gen Z. What can they do from their perspective, right? I mean, there's also an element of their contribution and, kind of living up to the expectation. That's one part of it, the do and the don't. And perhaps the other could be that even if they don't see what there was promised, having the courage to share that feedback. So there's a two part to the question: the do and the don't from a manager's perspective, a do don't from a Gen Z perspective.
Well, you put your finger on the do a moment ago when you said the word curious. Be curious. And part of being curious is to listen with full attention, not being distracted, but to really listen. And we have more courses about speaking than we do listening, so that can be a challenge for people, because we do have different listening modes in terms of what we're willing to pick up. So that is a do and a don't. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't take them for granted. Don't take them for granted. And listen with empathy. Okay. As far as Gen Z goes, um, keep the fire going, but be respectful. We can all learn from each other. Every generation has some wisdom to bring to the party, to bring to the table, including Gen Z. These folks have grown up as digital natives. I mean, we can learn a lot from them in terms of their willingness to push that button, whereas somebody else don't know it's going to blow up. I'm not going to touch that. Yeah, so the courage to bring is great. So you find that with wisdom of people that have the more experience. Um, you got a winning combination.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I really like just sort of the golden advice for be curious. So, just have a good ear to the pulse to say that, hey, what's my team up to? How can I learn? Be humble enough, and just I think keeping that simple at one level can go such a long way when you think about engagement. It isn't all the sort of the big bang and the perks and the compensation. All that's likely taken care of. It's sort of the onward journey where you just have to make sure. And we've seen such good examples. I'm sure as you've seen in my career, I've had fantastic boss where and I was lucky enough to even retain a team for almost 12 years, and I just know that we had very good communication amongst us. So this has been fantastic, Hannah. Thank you very much. I know that before we close, I do want to also give you the time for us to kind of let share with us where can people find you, and also if you can tell a little bit about the book that you've just released.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm happy to connect with listeners on LinkedIn. I'm there on LinkedIn. And the book that you're mentioning is called Seeking Fairness at Work, Cracking the Code to Employee Engagement, Retention, and Satisfaction. Because I think employers, they have all this wealth of talent on the payroll, and being able to fully tap into it through engagement where people bring that extra level of discretionary effort is really, really important in terms of profitability and innovation. But there are a number of written rules that I write about in the book that squelch that tamp it down. Things like approachability. When can you talk to a manager? Oh, no, not today, not tomorrow. They're in meetings, they're traveling. Well, I got a question. What do we do? Um, recognition. Recognition is huge, not just for Gen Z, but I think for everybody, because you want to be able to know that you're doing a good job, number one, but that it matters. If it's taken for granted, then it's like, well, what am I doing? Especially if you see somebody else doing less and getting away with it, it's like, well, okay, you might do it out of your own professional sense uh, of uh, of need, to the client, to the company, but there comes a point where it's like, as one vice president told me, "After you stop banging your head against a wall, you haven't fixed anything, but it does feel better." So, I mean, those are the things that we talk about but more important for management, it is a roadmap to how to fix it. Because it is about the holistic environment, not just one thing about the benefits or onboarding. Important, no question about it, but you need to have good conflict management. You need to have proper recognition. Uh, the employee life cycle has its ups and downs, and you need to be able to get things back on track when they start to fall off. Because we make mistakes. That's life, and that's okay. Let's learn from them. Let's move on. Because the sooner we do that, the more trust we build, which is another huge buzzword, right? Yes, but you can't have trust without honesty, and you can't have honesty without fairness. So that's what it all comes down to, and it's available on Amazon, uh, print and audio and ebook.
Fantastic. So please go do check it out. I think seems like lots of good stories there and lots of very sort of real practical examples from your own career, as well as just ways in which we can make this happen. It almost as Hannah, I hear you say that there's so much onus on a manager to become a good manager, and I think while we're talking about
Oh, yes.
I think he or she just needs to do their part to unleash the potential. And
Exactly.
I think that is one message that the bosses who are managing Gen Z can listen, and for the Gen Zs as well. I think, from their perspective, to kind of come curious, be humble, be learning, and as you really mentioned in one of the points in our interview or in our conversation was also that be very sort of realistic that it isn't always going to be a linear growth ladder, right? Things
Right.
can happen. You have to be just mindful, what the external conditions are doing, what the internal conditions are doing, and so on. So, and I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much. Glad this has finally happened, and I do want to wish you a pleasant and a rest of the good week, and being safe. And I hope that we can meet up in person in my next travels to the U.S. And have a great day.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.